And because neither deen in Arabic or dharma in Sanskrit translate to religion, where religion came from religio in Latin, which means state of obligation.
ওকে, আমার প্রশ্ন হয়েছে আপনার শেষ হয়েছে?
Okay. I didn't hear you because I came a bit late. Politics, ethics, and the human condition. Why the inter-discussion is focused on religion, I have no idea. And then, that's the critic. Now the question directed to Faisal Devji. Well, in this world, religion is very instrumental. And disenchantment or what ties, make it an adjective, the Weberian thing. How do we have ethics coming from secular discourse and try to create some balance in the politics, the bringing in the ethical thing, which we lack completely, this is brutal dog-eating dog politics. That's the question for you. Thank you.
Last question. My question is more on engaging the nature of formulating law and spirituality. Like as Professor Solimullah Khan just highlighted, the maternal nature of the polytheistic religion or those type of religions and the paternal nature of the monotheistic religions. So my question is how the technology or the increase of technology is actually impacting this shift of either are the religious diversities like many modes of religious practice and spirituality are they becoming more monolithic or this sort of diversity will be there in the future where it is mostly directed towards Ms. Jarnov, but I think other instructors are also encouraged to engage please.
Okay, so one last question please. Don't raise your hand anymore.
My question is to Salimullah sir. আপনি বলেছেন যে humanities project is justice and equality, and that religions exist because they appeal to the masses, because their project is ultimately distributing and achieving justice on earth. But this is completely ahistorical and also not found in the metaphysical systems of the religions we're talking about. Religious project, especially in the traditions of Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, the metaphysical project is not actually justice. Their metaphysical project is finding what's up, finding the truth, understanding what the world is. I'm really confused why you say humanities project is justice and why religion wants to achieve that, because it seems rather opposite the case.
I think we are done with the questions. Now before I give again floor to the Faisal Devji, I have my question as you were speaking about the metaphysical issues. We started with that. So my question is, if you look at the events in, especially after the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate, and there are some the series of conferences were happening at the Al-Azhar University, and then we saw the rise of Wahhabism, and that the MBBS was explaining all these things when he visited Washington back in 2020. So, as Al-Azhar series of conferences were looking for upholding the caliphate, and so their honest incarnations was to restore the caliphate in one or the other way. So how do you evaluate those series of conferences at Al-Azhar University, and how would you connect it with your recent book on the rise and fall of global Islam? So you have two questions, one for me and this is. So we'll give floor to everyone to respond to the questions.
Thank you very much. I'd actually like to begin with the question asked by the young woman initially, which from the English portion of it, I terms like religion, we are, of course, presupposing and predefining the discussion altogether. Because if you will, religion as an abstraction is already, of course, a secular word, and it presumes a secularized mode of understanding. But does it really help us to go to dharma or deen? In a way, it does, because it doesn't require an absolutely universalized understanding of any particular. You can't talk about dharma and talk about dharma outside the Hindu or Buddhist tradition. It hasn't been universalized in the way that the term religion is. Deen is a slightly different subject because, of course, it exists in the plural in Arabic, adyan. Now, the interesting thing about deen, of course, is that it was by far the most common reference point. If you look at, say, Arabic texts from the beginning until today, it was the most commonplace term that was used to describe what we call religion. So it, of course, referred to something quite different from what religion. The word Islam is a newcomer. It appears very rarely in the Quran itself. It is, grammatically speaking, a verbal noun. It describes a set of practices. It does not act as a proper name the way we use it today. In my view, Islam only becomes important as a proper name in the 19th century. It's a co-production of European or colonial scholars and Muslims. It's an unequal cooperation between them, but nevertheless, it is a co-production. And it was founded just like religion, if you will, as a secular term. Because Islam is understood historically, as emerging historically, and therefore it has a possibility of declining historically as well, which is why modern Muslims from the 19th century have always started their discussions of Islam by thinking about its possible end. In my book, I begin with highly famous Sadas. Sadas Dharmago Jazra Islam, the Sadas on the flow and ebb of Islam. For the first time you have, if you will, a secular way of understanding the end of Islam itself. It has become a proper name, it is understood historically and sociologically. And what I do in my book is trace the consequence, the rise of Islam as this kind of category and its implications and consequences. Because if you will, it in quote secularizes almost everything. So deen is a very good example of another way we can, another kind of term which we can inquire into precisely because it hasn't been universalized in the same way as religion. Now, to your question, sir, I mean, I happen to think that there is no particular qualitative distinction between religion and anything else. That is to say, um, uh, in terms of the distinction made between religion and non-religion is itself a metaphysical distinction, as someone like Muhammad Iqbal might say. So you might be a nationalist and be as enthused and as wedded to the transcendental idea of the nation state as something that pre-exists you, that has always been there, that defines who you are, for which you are willing to sacrifice. There is really, it is impossible to make a real distinction between that kind of feeling that the nation can inspire and sacrifices in the name of religion. Of course, it might be that different kinds of people are partisan to one of these categories as opposed to another, whether in terms of class or in terms of generation or region or whatever. But if you actually refuse the metaphysical distinction between religion and non-religion, where religion refers to the transcendent and the infinite and everything else is instrumental, then I think you probably have a better understanding of how what you call religion properly historicized functions. And you can have a kind of ethical system spun out of a religious worldview or a non-religious worldview. And often they interact. So when you look at modern times, for instance, coming to your question finally on the Khilafah, I was reminded of Maududi's book, Khilafat al-Mulukiyat, which he wrote well after the Khilafat movement. He had been active in that as well. And as you know, the Khilafat movement of at the very end of the First World War was led by South Asian Muslims. And of course, it gave rise to Gandhi's first non-cooperation movement, which brought Hindus and Muslims together. This alone shows that, as it was a reference to religion, can work in very different ways. The Khilafat movement was initiated as a movement that called for Hindu-Muslim unity, and that also called for the freedom of a nation state. You couldn't distinguish one thing from the other there. But what was interesting about it is that actually it was not about the Khalifa at all. Indian Muslims at the time, which is to say Muslims from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, as they exist today, probably didn't even know the name of the incumbent caliph. Of course, the caliph changed, during that period as well. They were much more interested in the caliphate as a way of thinking about authority. So many people like Muhammad Iqbal, whom I mentioned earlier, were against the Khilafat. They thought, what is the point of begging the Europeans or the British for something that you cannot establish yourself? Others like Maududi, when he later comes to write his book on the Caliphate, makes a very interesting argument. He says, well, here's what the Caliphate is meant to have been, but of course it never really was like that, like its theory. And that, he concludes, is not a bad thing. So the Caliphate gives way to monarchy, Mulukiyat, and to the rule of army generals and all the rest. And for Maududi, this is not a bad thing because he feared the power that a caliph as a person would hold. Maududi's whole way of thinking was based on the refusal of sovereignty. That is why sovereignty only belongs to God. It is to be expelled from human affairs. And society is meant to govern itself in his understanding, which is why the caliphate was a dangerous institution for him. And he said, well, it's a good thing. It would have been nice to have one, but the fact that we don't is actually probably a good thing. So he too, like the modernists, who otherwise his opponents, thought that you could have a parliament as a caliphate, you could have a set of organization and institutions, which together, while not claiming the title of the caliphate, actually performed its function. I think in more recent scholarship, we have gone back to the caliphate as if it were some kind of transcendental principle and institution that South Asian Muslims were wedded to because they wanted to escape the minoritized status in South Asia, in colonial India as it then was. Whereas I think they were much more inventive and imaginative about it. They had already, as Baldi put it aside, even Maududi tried to think of it in different terms. They were much more imaginative in thinking about the future of what was apparently a traditional Muslim institution. And I think that tells us much of what we would need to know about the contemporary history of whether it's Islam or if you want to use the word religion, that it is ever changing. It might refer to a set of principles which sound archaic, but in fact are not, and it is impossible to make a real distinction philosophically between what is religion and what isn't.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Joyner Barusi, your last comment, or if you have any questions.
First on the question of, I think, defining religion, and thank you for addressing it. It's, I completely agree. And I think also there, just to add a little point, what's interesting is to remember that by making definitions, we're also limiting sometimes the discussion, right? So it's sort of, again, this exercise of boundaries, right?